All right, so here we are with January AP, looking at the digestive system today. Okay, so here we see the beginning of the digestive system, see the oral cavity. Now here we see the lips, all right, so we have the superior and inferior labia, and then we see inside the oral cavity itself. Now when we look at the oral cavity, we have accessory organs like the teeth, the tongue, and the salivary glands. Okay, so teeth, tongue, salivary glands, these are all accessory organs that we see here in the oral cavity. Now, when we look at some of the muscles of the oral cavity that help with mastication, we can see the masseter, we can see the buccinator inside the wall of the cheek, and then we have the orbicularis oris. Okay, so these are some muscles that we talked about earlier in the muscular system, which help and assist with mastication. And so those are some things that we want to kind of pay attention to as well. Now, inside the oral cavity, again, we can see the tongue. Okay, we can see the teeth here. Now, the roof of the oral cavity is the hard palate. We have the hard palate, and then with the soft palate, the tip is called the uvula. Okay, now, when we look at the teeth, all right, so the teeth are the accessory organs that help with mastication. Now, we have 32 teeth in the adult, and this is divided into 4 sets of 8. Okay, so here's half of the lower jaw, so here is 1 set of 8. And so each set of 8 has 2 incisors, 1 canine, 2 premolars, and then 3 molars. Now, the last molar would be considered the wisdom tooth that came out, 16, 17, 18, 19 years old. Now, surrounding the teeth, we have the soft pink mucosa known as the gingiva. Okay, so that surrounds the teeth, prevents food typically from getting stuck in between the teeth. Now, when we look at some other aspects, the part of the tooth that we can actually see is known as the crown, and the part of the tooth that is embedded into the bone is the root. And so again, if we look at this model, all right, there you can see the crown, there you can see the root inside the maxilla. Now the tongue, the accessory organ, the tongue, helps with mastication, it helps with tasting, helps with swallowing. Now the bumps that we see across the surface of the tongue, those are known as the fungiform papillae, and so those are actual taste buds. And the row that we see in the very back here, these are the circumvallate, these very large taste buds, the circumvallate papillae. All right, those are actual taste buds as well. Now those are innervated by cranial nerve number 7 and number 9, facial, glossopharyngeal. Now facial and glossopharyngeal also innervate the salivary glands. Now when it comes to the salivary glands, we have 3 sets. Okay, so you have these out here on the side of the face known as the parotid glands. Underneath we have submandibular gland. On the exposed side we can see the submandibular gland a little bit more clearly without the mandible there. And here we see the sublingual glands. All right, so these are the 3 sets of large salivary glands that we have that produce lots and lots of saliva. Now, when the food is masticated and we have mixed it with saliva, it's ready for us to swallow it. And if we go back to this model here, okay, we can see this structure known as the epiglottis, which directs food and liquid into the esophagus, which is back in this area. Now, the esophagus is going to carry the food down behind the larynx and the trachea through the mediastinum. So here's the mediastinum behind the heart. And then it's going to go through the diaphragm and then attach to the stomach. Now, when it attaches to the stomach, that connection is known as the cardiac sphincter. Okay, so here it is, cardiac sphincter. We can see it on the inside, cardiac sphincter. All right, so there's the attachment between the esophagus and the stomach. Now, this is not a true sphincter, so it does have the habit of allowing materials to go back up, causing acid reflux and resulting in GERD, gastroesophageal reflux disease. Now, the stomach is a C-shaped organ, Okay, this top part is the fundus, the main part is the body, and then the funnel that we see at the end is the pylorus. Now the very end of the stomach, okay, here's the pylorus. The very end of the stomach is this here, known as the pyloric sphincter. Now the stomach is a very muscular organ like we talked about. It has 3 layers of smooth muscle which help it to churn the food, mixing the food with acid and enzymes, creating chyme. Inside, we see these folds of mucosal membrane known as the rugae, which allow the stomach to expand when we eat. Now, as the stomach releases chyme, okay, so chyme is the mixture of the food along with the acid and the enzymes that are produced here at the stomach. That chyme is then going to enter into the first section of the small intestine known as the duodenum. All right, so here is the duodenum, the first 10 inches of the small intestine. Okay, so this is going to receive the chyme as it comes out of the stomach. Now, one of the structures that we typically see here with the stomach is the greater omentum. Now, the greater omentum is this large apron-like sheet of fat that hangs off the edges of the stomach and drapes across the intestines. Now, the greater omentum does store fat. We don't know more about it than that physiologically, but we do know that when it does store fat, it does have the habit of getting larger and expanding and resulting in that kind of a beer belly or this paunch that we see on certain individuals. All right. So we're done with the stomach here. Okay, so we are going to move on to the duodenum. Now the duodenum is responsible for analyzing the chyme and making adjustments in digestion. I like to call the duodenum the gut brain because once chyme begins to enter into the duodenum, it controls and regulates all digestive activity. It's going to influence the stomach, it's going to influence the liver and the gallbladder, it's going to influence the pancreas, as well as the colon. And so the gut brain, the duodenum, helps to do all of that through different hormones that it releases, such as secretins, CCK, or GIP. Now, when we look at the duodenum, we can see the pancreas nestled into the crook of the curvature. Okay, this right here is the tail of the pancreas. This is the head of the pancreas. Within, we can see the main pancreatic duct traveling down horizontally here to the duodenum. Now, right here, we can see a small accessory duct branching off from the main duct, also attaching to the duodenum. Now, where the main duct attaches, we call that the hepatopancreatic ampulla. Now, the ampulla is hidden behind the duodenal wall. This structure right here is the papillae, which we can see. So this is the papillae of the hepatopancreatic ampulla. Now, the ampulla helps to regulate the movement of materials from the pancreas into the duodenum as it mixes with the chyme. We also see the common bile duct traveling down from the liver and gallbladder to the hepatopancreatic ampulla, where it will deposit bile into the duodenum, mixing with the chyme. Now, when we look at the common bile duct, we can see it transversing down here, traveling inferiorly from the liver and gallbladder down to the hepatopancreatic ampulla. Now, inside of our small intestines, we do see these ridges here. These are the circular folds, or the plicae circularis. On that, we would see villi, and the villi would then be covered with cells that have microvilli. Okay, so the microvilli, the villi, the circular folds here help to increase the surface area for absorption. Now, when the food comes out, okay, of the stomach and enters the duodenum, okay, the food or the chyme will mix with bile. It'll mix with pancreatic juices and enzymes, And this will help it to be ready for absorption when we get into the next section of the small intestine known as the jejunum. So the top left portion over here is typically the jejunum. This is where most absorption takes place. Anything that does not get absorbed makes its way down here to the ileum. Okay, so the ileum is the right, inferior portion here of the small intestine. We call it the terminus, or the terminal end. Now, holding this in place is a membrane that we refer to as the mesentery. Okay, so the mesentery is the web-like membrane that holds the small intestine in place. Now, the jejunum is typically 3 to 4 feet long. The ileum is typically 4 to 6 feet long. And so overall, the small intestine is somewhere between 10 and 12 feet, including the duodenum. And so the mesentery keeps that 10 to 12 feet of small intestine from getting twisted as it sits inside the abdomen. Now, the ileum is going to connect to the colon, all right, at an area that we refer to as the ileocecal valve. So this here is the ileum, the end, and here's the ileocecal valve where it connects to this section of the large intestine known as the cecum, this little pouch. Another structure hanging off the pouch here is the appendix. Okay. Now, the large intestine has 6 parts. The cecum is the first. Then we have this part that goes vertically. We call it ascending. Horizontally, we call it transverse. Inferiorly, we call that the descending colon. And then as it curves, we call this the sigmoid colon. Now, the very end of the large intestine is referred to as the rectum. So here we see a female pelvic model. Here's the rectum directly behind the bladder. And then here's the anus. And then surrounding the anus would be the external anal sphincter. Now, as we look at the large intestine, it averages 4 to 6 feet. It is held in place by this webbing known as the mesocolon. All right, so we can see above here, we can see the mesocolon. Around the transverse colon, we see the mesocolon down here along the descending and sigmoid colon, helping to keep it in place. Now, some other structures that we see here, we have the tinea coli, these strips of muscle tissue that we see transversing the large intestine. So that tinea coli is responsible for bowel movements. It's also responsible for producing these little pouches that we see here, known as the haustra. Okay, so one of these would be a haustrum, multiple would be haustra. Now the colon helps to absorb water, compacting the feces, and making it ready for defecation. Now the final the model that we need to look at here is the liver model. Okay, so here's our liver. All right, so the liver is the largest visceral organ. It sits just below the diaphragm on the right side. So we call that the right hypochondriac region. Now, down the front of the liver, we see something called the falciform ligament, which holds the liver in place, separating the liver into a right lobe and a left lobe. 80% of the liver is going to be in the right lobe. Now, when we flip this around, we can see the posterior structures. All right, this large vein here is the hepatic portal vein. Now, this hepatic portal vein drains the gastrointestinal tract to the liver so the liver can process the nutrients before entering into our regular circulation. It's purple to indicate its different function. So anytime we see a purple vein on these models, that's going to indicate the hepatic portal vein. So we can see it here on the posterior side of the intestines. Okay, so that purple vein is the hepatic portal vein. We can also see it over here on the back side of this duodenal model. Okay, so again, hepatic portal vein. Purple because it drains that blood to the liver for processing. Now the artery that you see here is known as the hepatic artery proper. Supplies the liver with blood. Here we can see the gallbladder. This is the cystic duct, which attaches to the common hepatic duct, forming the common bile duct. Okay, so this section right here is the common bile duct as it descends downward towards the hepatopancreatic ampulla. That should be it for the digestive system anatomy. Thanks for watching.